regarding my talk, when I sent out the invitation to my correspondents, someone complained that why should I speak about shofars right after the Chagim? We need to hear about shofars before the Chagim. So I reply that this will give you plenty of time to paint your shofar before the next Rosh Hashanah. So there you go. So let's dig in. Everyone, does everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so we're going to start with ancient depictions of shofars. We don't really see any decorations here, but just so we get a background, we have a shofar depicted on ancient coins. These are coins from the Yahud coins, which date back to the Persian era, the first temple period. These are very ancient coins. And it's not always clear. It's not obvious it's the shofar, but there seems to be, among the scholars of numismatics, there seems to be
Shofar?
Hello? Oh, I hear someone there in the background.
Yeah, please turn off your microphones, or shall I do it?
Okay. Well, there quite a number of researchers believe that these are shofars, and I certainly wouldn't be one to deny. Now, keep in mind that say our modern symbol of Judaism or Israel, the Magen David, is quite modern. The Gershom Sholem wrote about it. Ancient symbols, such as the menorah, were discussed by Stephen Fine in quite some detail, and he also discusses other alternate symbols like the shofar, and also the Arbat Minim, the lulav, which we'll also see. Our next example is from a mosaic in Hamat Tiberias, which is it's near Beit Sha'an, and there are two menorahs in this mosaic, and each of them has the implements, the shofar, temple implements, and also a lulav. And now these two they're a bit different color, but that's really just I think a different photograph source. And I think that the color on the right, which is more brown, is probably more accurate. Now note that on this shofar there appear to be some gold bands on the shofar. I didn't find that any of the scholarship really related directly to this gold bands, but we might have some explanations for these gold bands. Other examples later from Byzantine period, so we don't really find the gold bands, but it's not really clear because the resolution is much less, so it's not clear that how much could be read into that. Here's another example from the Hulda synagogue. We don't appear to find the bands. It might be possible that the bands fell out of use, which would make a lot of sense in the halakhic context. Now, let's just a second. Okay, now we'll move to the next stage. That's all I have here to present to you from actual ancient depictions of shofars. But now, how were ancient shofars from the medieval period, from the ancient period, perceived in the medieval period and drawn? So that's what we're going to deal with now. Medieval shofar temple depictions and illustrated Bibles. Now, it's well known that many illustrated Bibles would open with a carpet display of illustrations of temple implements and clothing. And so these are found in Catalonia, also found in Ashkenaz. I'm going to focus here on Catalonia. So here from the Copenhagen Catalan Bible, we find gold bands on the shofar. Now, this is not surprising because the Mishnah states that the shofar that was used in the temple had piv mitzupeh zahav. Part of the mouth was plated with gold. And what exactly is the mouth and where exactly the plating? There are extensive discussions about this. But the concept that the shofar in the temple had gold plating is found in the Mishnah. Okay, let's see some other manuscripts to compare. Here in the Perpignan Bible, we find that the entire shofar is gold, as opposed to the chatzotzot, the trumpets, which are silver, as stated in the Mishnah. Now, when we compare, if you see on the far right, when we compare the other implements, it appears that some attention was made to try and depict what was silver in more of a silver color and what was gold in more of a gold color. This is an interesting source. Another Bible, Modena, First Catalan Bible. I don't know how much is possible to read into the source because it seems like everything is depicted in gold in this Bible. Another one where it's not really possible to read in too much into the depictions is the King's Bible, where pretty much everything is colored in gold, and we don't detect any patterns necessarily. Okay. This is a good point to mention that I'm not trying to do an exhaustive survey of any of the types of sources which I'm presenting. I'm just providing you the ones that I found that were interesting, and often those that are interesting for purposes of contrast. Okay. Okay. Now let's move on to the next stage. Shofars in the medieval period. What was being done with shofars in the middle period? Now, shofars in the temple period, we have this source from the Mishnah, this Masorah, this tradition that says that there was gold plating, at least near the mouth. Now, in the Talmuds appear to frame that was only in the temple period and not later. Later, gold plating is possible, but not obligatory. So it seems that this was something that was falling away from the temple period. It was not used later. But in the medieval period, we have a new phenomenon which we don't find any mention of in the Talmud at all, and that's painting a shofar with paint. So we have extensive discussions among medieval sages of Catalonia and Provence, and that's what we're going to go into. But first, we need a little bit of background with the Talmudic sources on this. So both the Talmud Yerushalmi and the Talmud Bavli bring a Breita, which is a source from the early Tannaitic period. So we're doing about, say, 1800 to 2000 years ago, according to the tradition. These sources would date back to. And the versions brought in the Yerushalmi and the Bavli are very similar, just a bit different phrasing. We can look at the source in the Talmud Yerushalmi. It's the simplest. Tzipau zahav mibifnim pasul, mibachutz kasher. If you plated the shofar on the outside, the shofar with gold, that is kasher. But if you plated the inside of the shofar with gold, that's pasul. Why? Because this has to be a shofar, not a trumpet. If the inside of the shofar is plated with gold, all the commentators explain that it's a trumpet, and we don't want the trumpet. The trumpet is a different type of device which we do want, but we want to keep them clearly segregated. Now the Brisa continues. Sipao makom hanachat piv o shehaya kolo ave machmat tzipui pasul. If the actual mouth, the mouthpiece of the shofar was plated with gold, that's pasul. Also, if the gold plating causes the tone of the shofar to become ave, thick, somehow, whatever that is, then that would disqualify the shofar. But if it's plated on the outside and it doesn't affect the kol, or it doesn't affect it in a way that would be considered ave, then it would still be kasher. Now, the wording of this brisa in the Bavli on the left side explains im nishtane kolo mikamocha. If the tone changes, here we can understand that if the tone changes in any way because of the gold plating, it would be pasul, it would be disqualified. So now I don't know if plating a shofar affects the tone at all, and I don't know how it would affect it. And if it affects the tone to make it more like the tone of a trumpet, I don't know if the tone of a trumpet is more aveh, thick, than the tone of a shofar, but it very well could be. Now, I tried to find answers to these questions. These are essentially questions in acoustics, a branch of physics. And I asked some experts, I found some sources, but I didn't find any sources at all that deal with shofars in any way about the acoustics of shofars. There are sources that deal with acoustics of brass instruments. All that I was able to ascertain from these sources is that the mouthpiece is a very important part, and changing the shape of the mouthpiece changes the tone dramatically. I don't know if changing the material of the mouthpiece changes the tone, but again, we don't even know if in the source, if the mouthpiece, if that plating the mouthpiece in gold, if that's an issue of tone, or if that's an issue of being a trumpet. If the actual mouthpiece is made of gold and the lips touch the gold, then the Halakhah might not consider that a shofar anymore. It's just considered a trumpet, regardless of the tone, of whether the tone might be the same. Okay, so these are some questions. These are some interesting things to think about in the Halakhah. This gives us a background of what the Talmud has to say about gold plating, and the problems are if it's at the mouth or if it changes the tone. So now, what about paint? Does painting a shofar, is that going to cause a problem? Well, it could be that the paint is much thinner, makes much less of an impact than the gold plating. If the problem with the gold plating was that it makes it like a trumpet, maybe the paint is nothing like a trumpet, so maybe there's no problem. We don't know. So we find rabbinic sources that did address the question. So the earliest source that we find addresses the question is Drashot Ramban, Nachmanides, in his sermons on Rosh Hashanah, which are quite famous in and of themselves. There's quite lengthy sections devoted to Halakhah and the shofar within the sermons. And in one of them, the Ramban states, regarding the Talmudic sources we just saw, Lefichach elu shemetzayrim bo tzurot b'noto lo yafeh hem osim. Those who draw pictures and shapes on the shofar, they are not doing something nice, not something beautiful. It's not good that they do this. Shema nishtane kolo machmat otan siurim. Maybe the tone of the shofar is going to be altered because of these paintings that they're drawing on the shofar. Now we have two girsas, two different textual variants in the Rambam. We'll go with the first one. Va'afal pi she'en kulo metzupe b'minei tziurim, lifamim kolo mishtane behem. Even though the whole thing hasn't been painted, it's only paintings on part of the shofar, that might be enough to change the tone. And if so, then if it changes the tone, then the tone that we hear is the tone that's not produced exclusively by the shofar, but it's produced by the shofar and the paint. And we don't want that. We want a tone which is produced solely by the shofar. So this painting is a bit, no, you should not do this. Yeah. On the other hand, the Ramban does not state categorically that a painted shofar is pasul or disqualified, only if the sound changes, fitting what the Talmud says about gold plating. So it seems like the Ramban is somehow equating the paint with the gold plating of the Talmud. Okay, the next source that I want to review with you dealing with the painted shofar is from the Rithva, Rav Yom Tov Al-Savili. He was a student of a Ramban. So he's a good source. Now, the Ramban, the Rithva takes the position of the Ramban, but with a much more stringent approach to Chumrah. Me'ata kol shofar hametzupe u'metzuyar mibachutz ein tokim bo Ela im kein amdu alav bikiim kodem lechem. You should not use a shofar which has been painted for use in the synagogue in Rosh Hashanah unless it's been examined by experts beforehand. Umikirin shelo nishtana kolo klal mipnei hatzipui. And they can testify that the tone of the shofar has not been changed because of the painted coating on the shofar. It doesn't have other disqualifications. V'chein katav Ramban, so Nachmanides wrote in the source that we saw before from the sermons, Umori, not Rachmanin, and my teacher, may Hashem preserve, and that's a standard formula for to cite a living sage, and my teacher. Now, so both the Ramban and the Ritva's teacher both stated that one should not paint the shofars. But we see here that the Ritva is taking a much more stringent stance. You shouldn't use it unless it's been examined. According to Ramban, we didn't see such a thing. Yes? Okay. Now, who is the teacher of the Ritva, who the Ritva is citing? Well, we find here in this diagram, which I prepared for one of my articles on the sages of Catalonia and the Girona book findings, that these three sages essentially form the backbone of the Beit Midrash of the Ramban in Catalonia. Nachmanides, Rav Arna Levi, that's the teacher, and the Rithva, Rav Yom Tov Al-Savili. So here we have the 1, 2, 3. They're all in the chain, and they all say it. Now we have the source that the Rithva was citing, the Ramban, but we don't have the source, the Ra'ah. We have to rely on the Rithva, at least for now. Now, my inference from the Rithva that he takes a much more stringent stance, I was very happy to find that great Rabbanim, Gdolei Ador of this generation, came to the same conclusion. Rav Shmuel Alevi Vosner, Shevet Alevi, Rav Av Beisdin in Bnei Brak, he passed away 4 or 5 years ago. So in his shoot, Shevet Alevi, Rav Vosner states, U'lechora lashon hashulchan aruch, shehu me'Ramban, the Shulchan Aruch, which quotes the Ramban word for word, shekatav v'matzayirim lo yefeh hem osim, mashma rak zehirut lechatchila, aval im taka yatsa, ma she'en kein la ritva, v'yesh la hashif. So, according to Rav Vosner, if one made the tekiyot for Rosh Hashanah with a painted shofar, according to the Ramban, it's fine. It was kasher. But according to Rithva, it's not, unless there was an expert who examined it beforehand and approved of it. Then those tekiyot apparently are pasul, and somebody would have to go back and blow again on a different shofar. It's a big nafkamin of Halakhah. It makes a very big ramifications legally. So it does appear that the Ritva took things to a much more stringent place. Now, but what about Rav Arna Levi, the teacher of the Ritva, the missing link who's standing in the middle? Maybe he already advanced things towards stringency, or maybe not. For now, we don't know. Now, at this point, I would like to add another source which backs up this inference, and also that of Vosner, the Shevet Levi. This is a source. Now we're going to move briefly, but just for comparative purposes, we're going to move from Catalonia to Ashkenaz, to Germany. And we have a quite well-known source in the world of medieval Jewish art. This is a source from the Maram of Rottenburg from the 13th century. He was living at the same time as the Ramban, a bit younger. And so it doesn't appear that there could possibly be any direct correlation between the two sources. One would almost certainly not citing the other one, but they use exactly the same type of phrasing to refer to drawing and visuality. Here, the Maram is referring to Machzorim. And on the Tosafot, on the Daf of the Talmud, we find the Tosafot. And based on this source, in comparison with the response of Maram Rottenberg, Ephraim Urbach in Balei Tosafot, great expert on Balei Tosafot, attributed all the Tosafot on the Daf from Masechet Yomah to the Maram of Rottenberg, based on this source and one other source. So let's look at this source in the Tosafot. Nishalti, I was asked, Alotam mitzayarim b'machzorim tzurot chayot v'ofot im yafei osim im lav. V'yishavti, nirali devadai lo yafei osim. Shemitoch shmistaklim b'tzurot alalo ein mechavnim livam laviyim v'shamayim. Mihu ein kan isur delo ta'aseh l'chapes. So Maram, let's explain in English. Maram was asked about drawings in Machzorim. I bring an example on the left side from the Leipzig Machzor, a color depiction. So he was asked, is it good to do these drawings or not? In the actual tshuva, we see that the Maram was asked, why don't you protest what these people are doing? It's an avodah zarah. It's pesel. So the Maram answered, Lo yafei osim. It's not good. They shouldn't be doing it because it disturbs the concentration. But there's no problem about avodah zarah and lo ta'aseh l'cha pesel. That's not a problem. So I'm not going to protest. I'm not going to protest because meikar din, according to the letter of the law, it's permitted. So I'm not going to protest. But it's not a good thing. They shouldn't do it. It's best not to do it. So we find here too, the exact same Lashon language is used. The Mitzayarim, the Lo Yafei Osim. It's used for the Machzor, just like we find that the Ramban use it for the Shofar. Now, the reasons for the problem are completely different in the two examples. According to this example of Maram Rottenberg, the problem is that the pictures disturb concentration. In the Shofar, it's not a problem of concentration. It's a technical problem. It's a physical problem. That adding the paints makes it, maybe the shofar is not entirely shofar. It's a shofar and something else, and we don't want that. It's a technical problem. Yeah. So the issues are different issues they're responding to, but they both have drawings in them, and they're opposing them both, but not from the letter of the law, but from a different concern. There's a lesser concern that they both have. Now, I'd also like, it seems to me that both these sages came to this, you express themselves in this way, because it's a very elegant way of speaking. The Mitzayarim, there's like it's a very nice phrase. The Mitzayarim, they want to make things beautiful. They're coming to beautify things. So the rabbis are saying lo yafeh osim. They're not making it beautiful. That's why they're picking this language lo yafeh. That's what we would find. Yes, they're saying these efforts for visuality are not making things beautiful. They're not saying that the pictures aren't beautiful, but from a halakhic standpoint, there are other concerns that the rabbis have which make it not beautiful. Okay. So this very much, since the Maram is also speaking about something which is not from the letter of the law, it makes sense that the Ramban was also speaking not from the letter of the law. Unlike the Rithva, who says that there's a problem according to the law. Okay, here you have both sources side by side, so you can see Hamitzayarim, Lo Yafei Osim, both in the Maharam, in Rottenberg, and in the Ramban in Catalonia. Now, we have a new source, which I'd like to bring to you from my research in Girona bookbinding fragments. In fragments extracted from the Archive Diocesa in Girona, the church archive, which is of the three archives in Girona which have Hebrew manuscripts, the bookbinding, this is by far the least studied archive. But this is where I found some of the most amazing things. Here we have several pages. I just have the one relevant page before you, which contains a commentary to Tractate Rosh Hashanah. to the Masechet Rosh Hashanah. It's a Talmudic commentary. And this is a commentary which has not previously been identified. It's certainly not been published in any way, shape, or form. And I have identified this commentary as the commentary of the Ra'ah, the Rav Arna Levi, the teacher of the Rithva. And this is one of my proofs. I have other proofs and other reasons for making this identification, but this is the solid one of the solid ones, and the one that relates to our topic of shofars. So I've lined up the text from the manuscripts. It's lined up with the text below, so in case you want to see it inside the manuscript. Let's read it. Im nishtane kolo mikamot shehaya pasul. That's a citation of the Talmud. It says the commentator, Lefichach tov shelo lasot tziurim v'tzvayim al shofar shema nishtane kol al yedei kach ve'in makir. So here we have clearly this lines up with the Ramban, but he's expressed himself in a slightly different way. Here also it's even tov shelo lasot. It's best not to do this. If you did this, if you painted, these people who paint on it, if they did it, is it pasul? Is it disqualified? No, clearly not. From this lashon, we clearly see that it's not. It's good. It's tov not to do this. It shouldn't be done ideally. But if you did it, okay, then you did it. What's the problem? Now this is an interesting phrase. Maybe the tone of the shofar changed, but you don't notice that it changed. There's something here about some objective reality here that's kovea the halakhah, that tells us what the law is. The law is going to follow some type of objective reality which is not perceived, or maybe we didn't know it, or we're not the experts, like the Rithva. The Rithva says later we have to find the experts. Once we say that we have to find the experts, it's not clear there's going to be any experts. So it's like a fancy way of forbidding something. But this source, if it is the Ra'ah, and I strongly believe it is the Ra'ah, which Rithva was citing, this would appear that the stringency is not found already in the Rithva. The Rithva added that stringency to the sources. This is the last source, medieval source, that I want to consider in depth. This is a very interesting one. This is from Rabbeinu Manoach, Sefer Menucha. It's a commentary on the Rambam, the Mishnah Torah from Provence, and it's also from the same period as the Rithva, but in nearby Provence. So Provence and Catalonia were really very closely related Jewish communities. Even their languages, I think, were mutually understandable, and we find a lot of similarities between them. And here we find a Provencal sage who deals with the same issue, Rabbeinu Manoach. So Rabbeinu Manoach states, "Ubavur zeh yesh ledakdek b'shofarot u'metzuyarin v'livdok im nishtane kulo mipnei tziyur." Sounds like the Rithva. Therefore, these shofars, they should be checked. We should check and see if the tone has changed. Shehare darkan shel tzayarim letet beged tachat hatziyur. The artists, they put a clothing. You put clothing underneath the painting. Clothing, or cloth, maybe it might refer to, but clothing underneath. The havik is a hav, and that clothing makes the painting like gold. This clothing, or the combination of the clothing and the paint together, that makes it considered like gold of the Talmud. So the Talmud says that the gold, if it changes tone, that makes it disqualified. Here too, if the clothing that you put on the shofar and the paint on, that's what's going to make it. That's going to make the problem. That he states first of all, and it says, it's best that because of these problems, you shouldn't draw anything at all on the shofar. Just don't do anything at all. Now, it seems to me that Rabbeinu Manoach might have checked out this issue empirically about the painted shofars, and he might have found that there really is no change in the tone with the shofar when you paint on it. Nothing that anybody could measure. It was painted a bit. And he might be struggling to find a way to explain this prohibition of the Ramban and the others of why you shouldn't paint on the shofar. So he comes across this thing with putting the beged. You put the beged on the shofar. Now, another problem that we might have is with the paints. What kind of paints were being used on the shofar? Were they the same paints that were used to paint medieval illuminated manuscripts? Do those paints stick to a shofar? Maybe they fall off. Maybe you have to put some piece of cloth or canvas, something there as to hold the paint and attach that to the shofar somehow with some kind of glue, or just wrap it on the shofar. Maybe the paints don't stick. This is not, so I don't know the answers to these questions, but these are going to be avenues for research of what exactly are we talking about. So this is a very interesting source which sheds light on this issue of painted shofars. Now, after this, we don't really find any other sources that deal with painted shofars. It's cited in the Shulchan Aruch. And Beit Yosef, Rav Yosef Karo, he's the author of the Shulchan Aruch. So in his monumental Beit Yosef, he states that the prohibition is only on paints, on adding paints. Aval im ein sham minei tzivonim klal, ela shechakak bo surot kedei linoto. If there's no paint there and you just carved into the shofar, you make an inscription into the shofar, kedei linoto, to make it look beautiful. Pshita de kasher, that's obviously permitted. There's no problem at all with drawing inscriptions on the shofar. The problem was only with paint, or with gold, with adding external materials to the shofar. But once you're doing making an inscription, there's no problem at all. And it goes on. Now this is cited by the Ramah in his notes to Shulchan Aruch, and so it appears that this charita, this inscription, these became quite widespread practice, especially in Ashkenaz. But painting, actual paint, seems to have completely disappeared after this period. I brought another source down below, Chaim Palachi, from Turkey, from the 19th century. And he states that their custom is not to do any type of, even the inscription. Even inscriptions were not done. Yep. So that might just be a custom. But what we find, and interestingly, we find in modern shofars, if you go to a synagogue on Rosh Hashanah today, I think it's very unlikely that you're going to find a shofar that even has an inscription on it in any way. I think it's very unlikely. We don't have very many of these at all. And there are several reasons we could go into. It could be that there's a tendency for stringency based on this Kafakaim, this from Kalachi. There could be other considerations. It could have to do with the actual material that was used for the shofar. It appears that a lot of the shofars in Germany and in Europe were made from goats, from horns of goats, and these are not ideally what we want. It's not necessarily disqualified, but some might consider them to be disqualified. We really want a ram's horn, ayil. That's what we want ideally, and that appears to be what's used today. And it could be that the transition from the goat's horns to the ram's horns could have also knocked out this tradition of inscription, which might have been focused on goat's horns. Maybe there's different. Okay, the last source I'd like to discuss here relating to this is the Sloth. Now, the Sloth does something very interesting, which I haven't seen anywhere else to my knowledge, even in the Sloth himself, which I'm familiar with a little bit. But what the Sloth here is doing, he cites the Shulchan Aruch of this din, this law. And then he proceeds to give a midrash based on this din of the Shulchan Aruch as if it was a verse, as if it was a biblical verse. He explains the din that it deals Hamatsayarim are those who have thoughts, machshavot. They have thoughts in their head, and they believe that something should be permitted, even though something is in doubt. And they are not doing well. Really, what they have to do as soon as they have any doubts about any halakhic issue is they have to be stringent. It's a very interesting limud mode of rabbinic thought based on a line of the Shulchan Aruch, which I haven't found anywhere else. If anyone here has found something like this, I would be very interested to find something else like it. Now, I thought that maybe one of the reasons why he might have been attracted to the source, other than its idea of this visuality and the pithiness of the phrase, is that it could be that by this time nobody was drawing any paintings on shofarot, and so there was some sort of like struggle for relevance of this line of the Shulchan Aruch. It's something it should have some meaning, and so that meaning is something more in the mystical or the meaningful side of Judaism, rather than the physicality of the shofar and the paints and so forth. Okay, that concludes the section on the rabbinic discussions of painting on shofars. Now we'll move to the new section, which is how is the shofar depicted? Because we don't have any real shofars from this period. The earliest ones that we find are maybe 17th century. So there are no shofars that survive from this period at all. So certainly no painted shofars, nothing. But how can we know what a shofar looked like in the Middle Ages? The only thing we can do is we can look at depictions, medieval depictions, which include shofars. And we have to be very careful in evaluating these depictions that we're not looking at Polaroid photographs depicting the reality. We're looking at stylized images. But maybe despite that, we can tease out something and try and get some idea of what a medieval shofar might have looked like. So we could start with a quite obviously stylized, grotesque type of image appearing in the margin of Abraham's Ashkenazi Machzor. We see a shofar there, and there appear to be some bands on them, and they don't seem that different than the bands that we saw on the shofars from the depicting the temple shofars from the manuscripts. So there we have them. We don't know, obviously not depicting reality here with the animals tooting on the shofar. The phrase here, "Hashofar holech," is a catchphrase. It's going to tell us where the piyut, the liturgical poem on Rosh Hashanah, the first words on the next line. So surrounding this catchphrase, they drew a little picture. It's something very common in Ashkenazi medieval manuscripts. Here we have an Italian siddur, which has several depictions of shofar blowing. I'm bringing just a couple. And again, there seems to be some kind of pattern here on the shofars. It seems that there is something there. Quite likely this is based on a real shofar that they viewed. I don't know, but it very well could be. Here's another shofar from the Pesaro Siddur. Now, it's unclear. Obviously, something has been, if this is a depiction of a shofar, then something has been altered here. And if you could call that decoration or not, I don't know. I'm very liberal. I have a very liberal interpretation of what decoration is, and it could be putting these little shapes on it could be some sort of decoration. Here's again, obviously, some type of grotesque, which is not a Polaroid picture, but what's on this shofar? Is there some kind of I don't know, is like a moss growing on the shofar, or is it a some type of clothing or some type of decorative cloth? I don't know. I don't know. Here's a later shofar, and this is going to tie into the period where we already have real shofars that we're going to see next. And you see this kind of shofar might not be too far away from what we're going to see. We see some bands on this shofar. Is it real? Is it not? I don't know, but we do find that there are. It's not just a plain shofar. It's been something has been added to it. Okay. Now let's move on to the next section. Real artifacts, actual shofars that we have today. These shofars are found in museums, private collections. They're kind of all over the place. And it appears that the shofars with inscriptions may have been preserved more often than other shofars. So now I went through hundreds and hundreds of images. I'm just bringing you some selected ones, but you can just imagine how many there are. And you can't judge by what I'm going to present to you that all the shofars have these inscriptions or these shapes on them, but it does appear that those which did probably had more of a higher survival rate than the others because they were more special. Now, here's the shofar. I'm ashamed to say that I don't know what the source of this image is. This is an image I found early in my research. Found it on the internet. I did some sort of search on some site, and now I can't reconstruct my path of where it is, and it's not in Google Images. I tried everything. If anybody knows in the audience here, I know we have some quite big experts in that. If anyone can identify this, I'd be very grateful. This is the only shofar I've found with a silver plating on it. I found some references to silver plating of shofars, but I haven't found an actual shofar. Now, my source said that it was 19th century. I don't know, and I don't even remember what my source is, so we'll have to leave it. I'm sorry about that, but that's what I have. Okay, here we have some Ashkenazi shofars, and I found these at the same source. Now, and we have inscriptions on here. We have carved rings on the bottom of the one on the top, scalloped bell. That's that pattern that you see. Just a second. The pattern that you see on the right at the bottom, that's very common, this scalloping. We'll see it more later. The one on the bottom, it's a slightly scalloped bell. And we find text on these texts on here on the shofars. And an interesting thing here, just note by the way, is that it seems to us the text is upside down. Did anybody notice that? If you can read this text, the text, B'Kesel Yom Chagenu, there's I'll talk later about the verses which are commonly inscribed on shofars. They're taken from shofarot, which is the big part of the Musaf Rosh Hashanah liturgy, has verses which describe shofars. They're taken from there, not surprisingly. And here you have to hold the shofar upside down in order to read the verse. Now, there are those who believe that the shofar should ideally be held in this upside down position when it is blown. The reason why is because we have two types of shofar that are mentioned in the Mishnah and the Talmud. One is pashut and one is kafuf. Pashut means straight and kafuf means bent. And the explanation for bent is that we want to use a bent shofar because we should be bent before God, before Hashem, in prayer or in repentance. We're bent down before him. Now, it seems that type of bent down would correlate to this upside down type of shape. That way it's going down. The hook is going down. So there is such a possibility And there are other sources. There are some sources which depict the shofar being blown in pointed downwards, but the vast majority it's upwards, and like I'm sure you'll find today, that's pointed upwards. Okay, let's move on. Here we have some shofars from Romania. This is a section we found on the Center for Jewish Art website, which is very useful for me in finding specimens. And here you find various types of scalloping and holes, and these which are decorative. I definitely believe that these constitute a decoration. And here we go, Romania, Greece. Here we have shofars from Greece. Here you also have some scalloping at the top, and here it's very much more subtle, but it is a decoration there. The ends were not left as they were in nature. They were not evened out. These ridges were formed at the end of it, and it's a decorative, very very subtle stated. Here we have some sources from the Israel Museum. Here again we have an inscription. This is a less common inscription, from the Akedah, of Abraham. It's somewhat ironic because it appears that this shofar, like most of the inscribed shofars, were actually a goat's horn, not necessarily an ayil, but that was definitely the intention, bringing the verse. This is in the Israel Museum. Here's another shofar from Ashkenaz. This is dated back to the 17th century, where we have inscription. We have an inscription. We also have some geometrical patterns on it. And what about the blackness here? The black, I don't know, was some type of ink or paint added on to make it black like that? If so, we do have some kind of paint here. Maybe it was something so thin that nobody had any problems with it, with being a painted shofar. I don't know. Interesting. Also, some of the shofars, you seem to have this one hole top, which seems to, I didn't find anybody really discuss this, but it seems to me to be some kind of hook or loop to loop in some kind of string or necklace or to hang it either around the neck of the shofar blower, or perhaps on the wall. Here's some more shofars from in the Israel Museum, and these are not on the website, but are in the Volkswanger Collection catalog. And I thank Ananitza for pointing these out to me, that these are shofars actually held in the Israel Museum. Here's another shofar from the Israel Museum. This one states that it's from Yemen. And we find the ridges at the top, and we find this sort of like near the mouthpiece. We found this interesting kind of mouthpiece section. And it seems to me like this is somehow duplicating the shape of a mouthpiece of a trumpet or a horn, but using the natural shofar material. We find this motif of doing the mouthpiece in several shofars. We'll see later. Not from Yemen. Now there was an exhibition called Sound the Shofar, and in the exhibition catalog I found some more depictions of shofars, so I'm presenting them here. I'm presenting these shofars not in chronological order or necessarily in geographic order, but sort of in the order that I found the sources. They're organized by the sources. And we'll see more some typological analysis. Here's a shofar from Germany, 18th century. So we have a series of carved rings on the top and the bottom. And this is very striking. It's a very striking pattern. It's a very type of shofar. Here's a shofar, early 19th century, who knows exactly? Ashrei Ha'am Yodei Trua, carved onto the shofar. And we have these sort of fins on the shofar, very striking. Now, this is the point where I have to really acknowledge the expert on shofars, Jeremy Montague. This book, Jeremy Montague, this is a real powerhouse. This is a warehouse of shofar analysis. Montague is an expert in traditional instruments and musicology, and he had a vast collection of shofars. And in his book, The Shofar, he makes a typology, 16 different types of shofars with 3 subtypes, and he goes through them all methodically. And this is really incredible work. I was very excited, but he also has a website and seems like a very personable, outgoing type of individual. I was very excited to find him, and I wrote to him a few years ago when I first began the research on this topic. I didn't receive any response. I was a bit disappointed. Sadly, I found out that he passed away at an advanced age. So Montague really laid down incredible groundwork for analyzing the shofar. A wealth of information in his book. Here's a shofar that they had on the front cover of the book. Here's his type 4 shofar. Now here it's bent. You see my picture is bent, but that it's not really bent. It's really straight. That was just from the curvage in the book where I made the photo. But this is a striking type, which we didn't find anywhere else, with really large letters on the shofar. Here's a type from Eastern Europe with a hooked bell. This is type 6. He calls it a hooked bell type. And Montague says that this was a very common shofar in the early 20th century. And these with the hooked bells, Montague says they're all goat's horns. Now, I don't know if this type of shofar is familiar to you at all. It was familiar to me. And we'll see later, this hooked bell. Here's another example with a hooked bell, and here with the carved blocks. Now, this hooked bell and carved blocks is type 7. This is where it's found. It's an amazing thing that in child's toy plastic shofars that it's survived to the present day. This is a photograph that I made from eBay that they're selling today. That this type of shofar, which is no longer used, I don't think you're going to find anybody using this type of shofar with this type of design nowadays. But it was the basis for making this child play shofars from plastic, and they survived in this form. Very popular. And I've even had these in my house with my own children, and this is where I found it. So here you go. It's Montague type 7, this shofar, with the carved blocks on the underside and the hooked bells. Here's Montague's type 2, very long, with the carved rings on the underside. Here's a shofar from Morocco. Now, this is probably not going to be a goat's horn. This is probably a ram's horn, aisle. But we see at the bell, there's this curved design, this pattern, quite clearly. That is definitely a type of decoration. Here's a very interesting shofar which decorated a bit at the top at the bell, we find, and it also has an inscription. Now here, the inscription, this is a unique shofar, at least as far as we know. Could be there are others of this type, but none that survive. It's an excommunication shofar. On one side it says Shamta, on the other side, Cherem Nidui. These are all phrases which refer to different types of excommunications. Some types of excommunication are more strict and some are less strict. But this is when you do the excommunication, there's a shofar blow, which is learned out from the Talmud by the rabbinic authorities, by the poskim. So this shofar blow was done, at least for this community, which we're not sure exactly which community it is or exactly the period, but it's been estimated 17th century. I don't know. Why did they write this on these words on the shofar? It seems to me, and my teacher, Professor Daniel Sperber, concurs, that they wanted to make sure that this shofar was not used on Rosh Hashanah. Ki ein kategor nase sanegor. The blowing on shofar on Rosh Hashanah. On Rosh Hashanah we have the simanim. We want to have simanim of Rosh Hashanah. We want to have a good omen. We want to have a good sign. Everything good sign on Rosh Hashanah. We blow the tkiyot on Rosh Hashanah. We don't want to use a shofar that was used to put someone in cherem, to excommunicate, to do nudity. We don't want to use that type of shofar. We want to keep that shofar segregated, keep it away from Rosh Hashanah. So here, this shofar is clearly was inscribed and labeled that it would be used only for this negative purpose, and it would not be used for Rosh Hashanah. That appears to be the purpose for this shofar. Here we have some shofars which survive in a photograph in the Israel Museum. And the photograph we don't know. We know the photographer, Alfred Bernheim. And they have the original photograph in the Israel Museum. You can see these shofars that he photographed have inscriptions. They have this one loop at the near the top, near the bell. Very interesting shofars. From this period, later period, we could also find the shofar, not just the actual shofar, but also depictions of shofar. Here we have on the wall of a synagogue in Ukraine, in Chernovitz. My grandmother was from Chernovitz, from Ukraine, Romania, Austro-Hungarian Empire, whatever you want to call it. And so on the wall of the synagogue, we have a shofar, and you can see that there's some decorative designs up there at the top of the shofar. Now, the painted shofars, we saw the painted shofars fell out. It fell away. The rabbis seem to have been pretty successful in knocking out this custom of painted shofars, and it disappeared. We don't see any record of it until the modern era. There's one. I'm sorry I didn't bring it to you. There's one. We find a painted shofar from shortly after the War of Independence, with a Star of David painted onto it. But I think most of the painted shofars really blossomed after the 6-Day War and the recovery of Jerusalem, and this industry with the shofars. It's like an old city of Jerusalem industry, and you can find these shofars there. And then with the internet period, they took off on the internet. You can find these all over the internet. Various websites are selling these like hotcakes. And these shofars, which you might buy for 100 or 200 shekels, once they're painted, they're going for $1,000. It's really, and there's just like so many of them, but it appears to be a uniquely modern resurgence. But it's ironic that in the Middle Ages, that painted shofars were going around, and now they seem to have latched on to something which is actually quite old. It seems to me that with these painted shofars, like we mentioned, we want, and the shofar itself is a symbol of Judaism, Jerusalem, Israel. And if you could add other symbols, you could put on the shofar, you could put a menorah, you could put a Lion of Judah, you could put a Star of David, you could put pomegranates, the word Jerusalem, you could put all these things, you could make super symbols. It's like, and so these things have become quite popular in the contemporary market. I don't know if anybody's studied these at all. I don't know if the art is really, if it's considered of such a quality to do the research on or not. I don't know, but these are found quite prevalently. Modern painted and plated shofars. Now I want to wrap this talk up here with where can I go from here with this research. So I have 4 directions. One is the actual shofars themselves. examination of shofars in museums and private collections, building on Montague's typology, just to continue the work. Montague, I don't think was working so much with the internet, in the internet age. Could be that there's things could be done to expand on his or refine his typology. That would definitely be a challenge. The second avenue of study is the medieval paints. These shofars that we discussed in Catalonia and Provence, they were painting on. What were they painting with? Did these things stick on the shofar? Did they have, like Rabbeinu Manoach said, that they put a baguette or a cloth underneath it? What about the paints that were used for manuscript illumination? Could those be used on shofars? Would they have to use some type of base, some material base on the bottom? These are questions which I don't have the answers to. Another branch of research is the acoustics. Empirically test the effects of gold plating and paints on shofar tones. There's obviously a subjective element here. If the tone changed or did it not change? But to what extent can this be quantified empirically through tests? This could be very interesting. The shofar could be compared with the trumpet tone. The shofar could be plated, and then the signature of the waveform of the results from different types of tones produced, different registers produced on the different shofars could be compared. Maybe we could get some type of idea of what the sages were talking about. Finally, continued research into the manuscripts and finding sources, finding textual sources of relating to the issues which have been discussed. There are more opinions which I haven't mentioned here, such as Rabbeinu Yonah. For example, Rabbeinu Yonah maintains that any type of plating, he's not discussing painting, but any type of plating which is in the half of the shofar closer to the mouth is not going to be a problem in any way, shape, or form. But on the other half, that side closer to the bell is going to be a problem. Now he's learning this out from textual sources, but is it also based on empirical studies that he might have done, tests that he might have done? I don't know. So there are more opinions, rabbinic opinions here that have to be added and put in play for further research. With that brings us to a close. And this is what I've been able to find out about decorated shofars from visual sources, from textual sources, what I've been able to put together. And I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to field them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Leor. That was really very interesting research in progress and a fascinating subject. And I'm opening the floor for questions. I think Eva wrote one question in chat, so maybe I'll read it. It was a question to you, Leor. If you have seen the colored shofar in the first Kaufman Mahzor, look at the chat box.
Okay.
Eva, are you still with us?
I'll look for it. I'll look for that one.
Yeah.
I'm here. Thank you so much. So fascinating. I think it's actually presumptuous of me to be asking you this. So
no, it's not at all. It's not at all, Eva, because there's so many sources. I just haven't. It's overwhelming, you know, to go through everything. So okay, the first Kaufman Mahzor. I'll
tell you what. Let's be in touch out of here, because there is an overlap between your interests and mine. I'm very grateful. Put it in there because the others that you showed, they were black and white, you know, as in drawings and so on. Yeah. This one actually has red and blue colored bands on it. So I thought, oh wow, that's paint. Very interesting. I'm one of the reasons I was looking forward to speakers. I was sure that you and other experts would have some more examples, which I haven't. So I'm very grateful for this. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Mariam,
yes.
yeah.
So does the carving influence the tone? Because you spoke about the paint, but not about the carving, or
the covering, meaning what? Like, well,
carving.
The carving.
Yeah, well, it seems like according to Rabbeinu Manoach from the 13th century, I'll put his text back up on the screen. Just a second. Is this one?
Because I could well imagine that it
Here,
can.
do you see this?
Yes. Yes.
Rabbeinu Manoach. Wait, do you see the screen?
No,
The end of slide.
Mine went black. Just a second, I'll try and screen share again. How about that?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You got it?
It's okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Rabbeinu Manoach, on the face of it, he seems to think that the paint itself is not going to change the tone. But if you add the beged underneath the paint and then paint on top of that, then that beged, he calls it, that piece of clothing he calls it, that you put on the shofar, that might change the tone. So that's what, it's not necessarily what Rabbeinu Manoach is saying. It's an inference, but it seems quite strong. It seems quite a logical inference that that's what he means. So now that would be something else to test empirically. We'd have to take the shofar, put a piece of cloth on it, paint on the piece of cloth, test it, and all these different things, see if the tone changes. It's not entirely clear. I have a friend of mine from college is an expert in musicology and computer music. I asked him this question. He said he doesn't think that these things are going to change the tone of the shofar. As long as the inside of the shofar remains that same material and that same shape, that it's not going to affect. I don't know. He's not sure about it either. And I consulted several music colleges. I couldn't get any clear answer to this. So I think it would have to be tested.
But
yeah,
I think that Marian asked about carving, like decoration.
Oh, carving. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I missed. So carving. So that's the Beit Yosef carving here. So now this is I tried to explain it in the talk, but carving might change the tone. Carving might change the tone. We're not sure. But if it changes the tone, it's not going to be a problem from a halachic perspective. We don't care. Because we have a klal, we have a principle which is stated in the Talmud Yerushalmi. And it's cited by poskim. And that principle is kol hakolot b'shofar ksherim. Kol hakolot ksherim. Any type of sound, a tone that you can produce from a shofar to do the tkiyot and the truot and Rosh Hashanah, any type of tone is going to be kasher. It's fine. There's no problem with the tone. If it comes out like raspberry tone or buzzy or it doesn't make a difference. As long as you can do the tashrat and the tak using that tone or those tones, all of those types of tones are fine. We don't care about what it actually sounds like. So too, when we carve into the shofar, do all these carvings, it might change the tone, but the poskim are not worried about that. They don't care because it's still a shofar. There's nothing else there, and kol hakolot b'shofar ksherim. So the answer is that if the tone changes, we're not concerned about it. Now, does the tone itself actually change? I don't know. It could be, but it would have to. This would also have to be tested empirically.
But why then the previous example that you brought, that the tone did change because there was a cloth around and this wasn't recommended to do? Like it was painted on
Rabbeinu Manoach is dealing with paints. He's dealing with painted shofars.
Yeah.
And he says that the problem with the painted shofars, where is it here? The problem with the painted shofars, apparently it's not, the problem is not coming from the paint itself. The problem is with the beged. Once you put the beged on the shofar, then that beged, maybe in conjunction with the paint, maybe the beged and the paint together, I don't know, whatever, either the beged or the beged and the paint, that makes it equivalent to gold, to the zahav. And the zahav is what's dealt with in the Talmud. The Talmud says that if the gold plating changes the tone, that is disqualified. So Rabbeinu Manoach says that if you have this beged in conjunction, maybe in conjunction with the paint, that is equivalent to gold, and that could change the tone, so you shouldn't use it. What it seems, the inference of Rabbeinu Manoach is that if you just attach paint by itself to a shofar, that's less than gold. And it doesn't have the capacity to change the tone in a way that gold does. And so it couldn't possibly disqualify the shofar.
Mm-hmm. But did you find any examples with such a beged, as you call it, such a cloth around, decorative? No?
Well, there's this example here on the screen,
yeah,
a modern example where they just, for something you find on eBay now, where they some kind of piece of cloth, decorative cloth, is draped onto the shofar. This is obviously not what Rabbeinu Manoach is referring to, but this is close. This is the closest thing that I could possibly get. But no, I don't. Maybe in the medieval illustrations, maybe something could be discerned. It seems like it would be very difficult to discern from a medieval illustration that there was a piece of cloth on the shofar. But we have this written source which says that that there is such a thing. Now it's also possible that Rabbeinu Manoach might have. It's very possible that Rabbeinu Manoach did not observe any beged like this on the shofar ever. But he's just speaking hypothetically. He could have found people painting in manuscripts or on other surfaces where they paint on pieces of cloth, on canvas, some type of canvas-like material. And you could extrapolate that maybe that is the type of painted shofar. Maybe that was done. I don't know. He didn't necessarily see a shofar like this, but he might have. We don't know.
Here there is a question from Dana. Dana wrote, I noticed the shofar you showed from Morocco. Did you find more from North Africa region? And did you find changes and uniqueness, or did you mostly find differences between Ashkenazi and Sephardi?
Well, I didn't really find anything. Didn't find much of anything. Those shofars from Morocco that I provided, those are from Montague, and I believe that Montague himself purchased that. Where is it? I'm trying to find him. Montague purchased that shofar in Morocco, I believe. Well, I can't find it at the moment. Let's see, that's Greece. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't have anything to report other than Montague identified that as a Moroccan shofar. Yeah, it requires further investigation. I'm sure that there's a wealth of shofars around from North Africa. It would be very interesting to I should have put that in my list. I guess that is part of my list with expanding the repertoire of shofars, trying to find, expanding on Montague.
I think Ilya wants to ask something, Leor.
Yes, thank you. Fascinating talk as always. Thank you, Leor. I just think the reiterating objection to or discussions of decorated shofars prove that this practice was existed through the ages, yes, all the time. So it is very interesting just to rewrite this story from another side. What were the motives for decoration of shofars in each place, and what was the meaning and the ideas behind the gilding of shofars in the ancient times, and the coloring or painting of shofars in the medieval ages. So it's very interesting to see through the objections this positive practice.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't speak very much about this today, but if we go back to the Mishnah, to the source dealing with the temple, saying that the temple shofar was gold plated. Even in the commentators to the Mishnah, we don't really find much of an explanation of why was it gold plated. They all jump into the discussion of where could it be gold plated and where not gold plated, and what are the legal ramifications, but why was it done? There are some commentators who explain that it was for kavod, it was for honor, likavod. That makes a lot of sense to me, and that it was done to beautify, for honor, this original custom. Yeah, this is ancient custom here of gold plating the shofar. Now, later, within the rabbinic discussions with painting, it appears from the rabbinic discussions that they understood that the motivations of the painters were aesthetic, that they wanted to beautify, to decorate the shofar. That's all that I could see in terms of intentions. Now, once these decorations are geometric or just recurring patterns, it's hard for me to see any type of motivation other than this, just to decorate. Ze'eli van vehu. We want to beautify the mitzvot. That as we come to do the mitzvah, we try and make the ritual object as beautiful as possible. It makes a kiddush Hashem. So that makes the Ramban's statement very pithy. They're coming to beautify the mitzvah, but it turns out that they're making something not beautiful. It's not because of a separate problem, not because the art is not aesthetically pleasing, but because there's a problem, a technical problem with the sound. Or as the Maharam in Rottenberg said, there's a problem that it disturbs concentration, and in prayer we need concentration, so we shouldn't be looking at illustrations in the Machzor. So that was all that I was able to discern about the intentions. But if you have anything to add to that, I would be very.
So thank you very much. I'm, of course, very curious of the paradigms of beauty. Yes, when we say to beautify, I'm not sure that we now understand the beauty in the same way as in other periods, cultures, places, and so on. So I think it's very interesting to just think about, to explore this subject in the immediate context in each given place. But it's really amazing topic, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
I think we have one more question by Maya, and I think we should then wrap it up. It's almost 5:30, right? Maya.
Leor, thank you so much. That was like so much material that I had like a lot of associations to. One of them is that like this incredible attention to the materiality of the shofar and to everything that surrounds it, at the same time that there seems to be like almost this like undoing of the idea of like materiality, but that it almost doesn't matter because it's all in the dichotomy of kosher and puzzle. And I was like wondering if, you know, like it's one thing what rabbis say, and then another thing what people are actually doing. If you found that there's almost like a game of trying to create a kosher shofar within the limitations and like pressing the boundaries at all.
I think so, and I think that what we saw with the Beit Yosef and the permission to do inscriptions on the shofar. There's a saying in the Talmud, Kol mad asar rachmana share kedavate. Everything that is permitted, everything that is forbidden according to the Torah, there's some variation of it which is permitted. And then they would come with several examples, like you're not allowed to commit murder and draw blood, but Brit Milah you're allowed to do. You're not allowed to eat meat and milk, but you can consume the udder of a cow, etc., etc. And it doesn't. We don't care if the udder of that cow somehow has lots of milkiness in it. We don't care about that. So, also here, I think that there is something like that. I think that the fact that the Rabbanim provided this alternative of inscription, I think it really helped to knock out. I perceive it as a knockout of the painting. I think that the painting got completely disappeared because there's never any other relation to it at all until the modern era, really until this generation, when we find the painted shofars from the old city of Jerusalem and coming back on. And then it's easy for the rabbis to say it shouldn't be done. It's not, because there's always this source. But in the meantime, over hundreds and hundreds of years, there's no relation to it at all. So I think they were successful in knocking it out. And I think the provision of this alternative, this kosher alternative, really helped knock it out. And we find so many examples of inscribed shofars, what you saw today. It was very, very popular. So although, as I said, my presentation here is skewed, both because I'm picking out the ones that are inscribed, and also because the ones that survive tend more often to be the special ones and that were inscribed. But still, it was obviously very, very popular. There's something. I think it's unusual how today things have gone so far to the other extreme, away from what things were just before, in Europe before the Holocaust. I think that almost every shofar was inscribed or had some kind of decoration on it, and now none of them do. It's really amazing. So it seems like there's some kind of like return to sources or reconstruction. There's a famous article by Chaim Soloveitchik called "Rupture and Reconstruction," where he describes how the traditions from generation to generation in Europe, which are transmitted from one generation to another in communities in Europe before the Holocaust, when that was so jarringly interrupted by the Holocaust. So after the Holocaust, there's sort of a return to textual sources. You might call it a type of fundamentalism, but it's really like communities have broken up and people are looking to rebuild, and the traditions are not there anymore. They're gone, but the texts are still there. And so things get built up by the text, and the texts are not really so warm about these illustrations at all, and the drawing. And so they didn't come back. Now people want to be sure that they have a 100% kosher shofar. Not only that, we have kashrut committees that want to make sure that the shofar is kasher. So how do they label the shofar that it's kasher? So the kashrut committee put a sticker on the shofar that says kosher, and but there's opposition to that, because maybe the sticker, maybe it's like painting, or maybe it's like painting, and maybe that's affecting the sound of the shofar, so they shouldn't put the sticker on it. and they can't carve onto it because there are those opinions like the Halakhah say not to carve. So they're stuck. You know what they do, but we see that there's this sort of everyone wants to be more kosher there, and so I think it's almost for certain that if you go on to Beit Knesset on Rosh Hashanah, you're going to find a shofar there which has no decorative aspects at all. It's been completely denuded of any type of decoration. Another reason for that, which I might explain, is that this inscription tradition might be based a lot on goat's horns, and goat's horns are very problematic halakhically, and it's really this is a whole issue of itself, which I haven't gone into in full depth, but the fact that they were using so many shofars made from goat's horns, which are either, they might not be pasul, but they're certainly not ideal. It's amazing that these were so prominent in Europe. And it could be that the technical knowledge of inscription and the methods of inscription might have been tailored for these goat's horns and might not work so well on the ram's horns. This is just a hypothesis. I don't know, but there needs to be some kind of explanation about why the inscriptions were so popular until so recently and have almost completely disappeared.
Okay, thank you very much, Leor. Can you stop sharing so we can see each other a little bit?
Sure.
Okay.
Great.
So I think it was fascinating, and thank you very, very much also for the discussion. We recorded it, and we'll find a way how to share it with you.